Okay, I guess we will get started. It is 11:32. We still have people signing in, but I want to be very respectful of your time. So thank you for being here today. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Karen Smith. I'm the Executive Director for Leadership Macomb. And assisting me today are Leadership Macomb staff members, Julie Petkoff and Isabella Crook, our social media coordinator. And if you're not familiar with the Leadership Macomb program, we have been around since 1996. And traditionally, we offer a 10-month program that starts in September and ends in June. And we meet once a month and focus on specific topics relevant to Macomb County. And we meet in person and do behind the scenes field trips and have great speakers and learn a whole lot in the hopes of learning things that will help us to make Macomb County a better place to live, work, play, do business. So because of COVID, we were unable to have our in-person class this past year, but we wanted to stay true to our mission of educating people about relevant topics in the county. So we developed this 10-part virtual series, and today's session is already our 9th of the 10-part series, and we're going to be focusing on education today. And we, education has, like every industry, has gone through a ton of challenges over the last 14 months. So today we're going to be learning about some of the successes and challenges that education faced, K through 12 and college. And as always, I want to thank our sponsors. We couldn't do what we do without them. So our sponsors are Macomb Community College. We're very proud to have Jim Sawyer, the president of Macomb Community College, with us on our panel today. Henry Ford Macomb Hospital, Marchand Advisory Group, DTE, Oakland University, and we're proud to have Jennifer Anderson from Oakland University chairing our day today. Plant Moran, First State Bank, thank you so much. So Jennifer Anderson is a graduate of Leadership Macomb, and she spent a few years working with me at Leadership Macomb, and she spent some time at Macomb Community College, and now she's at Oakland University. She's a wonderful, wonderful person, and she graciously volunteered to chair today's session, and I'm so thankful to her. So she and Dr. Alicia Fly, who also serves on our board and works at the MISD, kind of put today's session together. So very, very happy that they decided to help us out today. And as I said, we couldn't offer our program without our sponsors, and we've been highlighting different sponsors during each of our series. So today we're going to specifically focus on Oakland University Macomb and thank them for their generous support. So I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Anderson. She's going to say a few words about why they sponsor us, and then she's going to start today's program. So Jennifer.
Thanks, Karen. It's an honor to be part of this webinar series and to discuss this year's achievements and challenges that took place in education. But before we start, I'd like to take a moment and on behalf of Oakland University, share our connection to Macomb County and Leadership Macomb. Macomb County has been an important part of OU's growth and success since its founding more than 50 years ago. In 1991, Oakland joined Macomb Community College as one of its first partners in the establishment of the Macomb University Center located in Clinton Township. Designed to bring higher education options to Macomb County, the University Center was the first of its kind anywhere. In 1998, Oakland partnered with the Macomb Intermediate School District to host a second educational site offering graduate programs for educators. This further increased our presence in Macomb County. And to further increase our presence, in 2010, we were gifted a generous donation from two prominent community leaders, Gabe Anton and Stuart Frankel. Oakland received a 25,000 square foot building in downtown Mount Clemens to expand our educational offerings in the county. And in 2011, we opened our doors to our first and only owned educational site outside of our main campus in Rochester, the Oakland University Anton Frankel Center. Today, Oakland is committed to enriching the lives of Macomb County residents through the delivery of a broad range of programs. At the Macomb University Center, Oakland has the largest enrollment of the 11 institution partners. Between Macomb University Center and the OU Anton Frankel Center, Oakland offers approximately 200 courses in the county each year. In the fall of 2019, more than 1,100 students were enrolled in at least one course at our locations. Oakland University is a preferred transfer institution for Macomb Community College. About 1/3 of OU students come from Macomb County, and more than 22,000 Oakland University alumni call the county of Macomb their home. OU is focused on serving the needs of transfer students and adult learners in Macomb County. Many of our courses offered in Macomb are delivered in an accelerated or hybrid format. Programs are designed with flexible schedules so that students can complete their OU degree right where they live and work. We offer bachelor's and master's degree programs and certificates and endorsements in high-paying career fields such as human resource development, elementary education, education specialist, educational leadership, information technology, human resources management, general management, marketing, social work, accelerated second degree Bachelor of Science in nursing, and an integrative studies degree program with program tracks in corporate leadership, healthcare leadership, and criminology. We also strive to be an active community partner. We are engaged with local communities in the county in a variety of different ways. Each year, Oakland University supports several key chamber and community events, such as the State of the County Address, the Let's Move Festival of Races, the Macomb County Santa Parade, and several others. We host a community-wide food drive benefiting the Macomb Food Program. Together with the City of Mount Clemens and a variety of local businesses and agencies, we were able to collect nearly 5,000 pounds of food in the fall of 2019. We're also an active member of the Macomb County Chamber and the Sterling Heights Regional Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Several staff members serve on community boards, such as Leadership Macomb. And finally, since we're looking at the year in review in education, I just want to mention that as a result of the COVID-19 global pandemic, OU took on an enormous effort and transferred all of our face-to-face instruction to a remote learning format. This transition happened in a matter of only 5 days, from March 11th to March 16th, 2020. Remote learning continued through the summer of 2020. And at the same time, the university instituted a wide range of measures to limit the spread of COVID-19, including daily health screenings, mandatory face coverings, and social distancing. We also updated our cleaning protocols and much more. As we meet today, OU classes are still mostly remote. As we look to the fall semester, Oakland is planning for instruction to be once again primarily face-to-face. Again, thank you, Karen and Leadership Macomb, for allowing us a few moments to share our connection to Macomb County. Now let's begin the program. First, I want to take a moment and thank the Education and Workforce Development Day Committee, Dr. Lisa Gipko, Matt Dishman, Dr. Alicia Fly, Christopher Riley, Patrick Rouse, and Ann Snyder. I sincerely appreciate your input and wealth of knowledge. It's an honor to work with you. When we first met in September to start planning this webinar, we didn't know what to expect. The academic year had just started. Information and instructions were constantly changing. The one thing we did know was COVID-19 was definitely impacting education. We wanted this day to reflect achievements, even in the midst of a global pandemic. But we also wanted to address the challenges everyone faced, from students, parents, faculty, administrators, and even the public. No one was exempt from experiencing the effects COVID-19 had on education this year. Today's agenda is broken out into 2 sections. First, we will have an engaging panel discussion on the impact COVID-19 has had on the K-12 education system. Then we move to higher ed and a conversation with Jim Sawyer, president of Macomb Community College. Feel free to ask your questions in the chat box featured below, and we will try to answer as many as possible. With that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Alicia Fly, Chief Academic Officer for the Macomb Intermediate School District, who will serve as our panel moderator. Dr. Fly has served as an executive leader in local school districts in Michigan, Ohio, and Minnesota, including experience with diverse, high-needs learning communities. In Michigan, Alicia has established and maintained curricular and co-curricular programs in the Ann Arbor Public Schools, Rochester Community Schools, West Bloomfield School District, and the Utica Community Schools. Dr. Fly has vast knowledge in educational arena, and has successfully served in leadership roles, including Deputy Superintendent, Human Resources Director, Elementary Principal, Middle School Principal, and Classroom Teacher. Alicia, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Well, good morning, everyone. The panel members and I are extremely excited to have this conversation about the challenges and celebrations of operating K through 12 schools in the midst of the COVID-19 global pandemic. You know, since Governor Whitmer issued the executive order closing schools to in-person instruction in March of 2020, students, parents, community members at large have had just a range of experiences and emotions during this time. Yet today, you will hear about the resilience of our students, our staff, our parents, and Macomb County community members. Because in Macomb County, we absolutely know and understand that resilience is all about being able to overcome the unexpected. It's about choosing to be better and not bitter when faced with adversity. And we are very excited about the panel members that we have joining us today. I know you had the opportunity to see their bios as they were scrolling on the screen, but we are very pleased to have with us Eric Edoff, who began his career as a science teacher and through a series of promotions and opportunities currently serves as the superintendent of L'Anse Creuse Public Schools. Eric also has experience as a middle school assistant principal, senior director for the Pinkow Center of CTE, Math and Science and Performing Arts, as well as assistant superintendent. And so we're very excited to hear from Eric Edoff. We also have with us Bruce Volkert, who currently serves as the principal of Trinity Lutheran School. And Bruce has experience as a teacher and a principal in both Illinois and Michigan. And for those avid golfers out there, Bruce has also served as a golf coach. We do also have with us on the panel today two of our most recent Macomb Outstanding Teachers of the Year. Gabriela Vila is a social studies teacher at Lincoln High School, which is part of Van Dyke Public Schools. And she also serves as the social studies department head, student government co-advisor, and the students love her, and was recently selected as Macomb County's Outstanding High School Teacher of the Year for 2021 by her community. Dawn Nacker is one of our panel members as well. And Dawn is a veteran educator, has served 29 years in education, and half of that time has been as a classroom teacher, and half of that time has been as a literacy consultant. Dawn currently serves as a literacy consultant with Utica Community Schools, and Dawn currently is Macomb County's Outstanding Teacher of the Year at the elementary level. Wearing her parent hat today, and those parents out there, you don't ever get to take those off, but we are very pleased to have with us Bethany Tabaki, and she's the proud parent of two amazing children. They both are elementary age, a second grader and a sixth grader, who attend Utica Community Schools. And Bethany says as a parent, she was able to observe and support both of her children with their virtual learning. And so we're very anxious to hear how she navigated that. And Bethany also serves as an early literacy coach with the Macomb Intermediate School District. I am probably most excited about having a student on our panel today. And we are so pleased that Phoebe Frazier is a member of today's panel. She's a recent graduate, class of 2021 of the International Academy of Macomb. And Phoebe says over the past year, she's learned plenty from her experience through quarantine and the pandemic, and she's excited to share her thoughts and observations. You will have the opportunity to hear from each of those panel members. I'm going to give just a quick overview and share some demographics about Macomb County, and then we're going to launch right into the Q&A portion for the panel members. And I know that you will have an opportunity as audience members to participate in this discussion as well. Just in case you aren't familiar with the demographics when we're talking about Macomb County Schools, we have approximately 120,000 students in Macomb County, and this is this is our recent student count, and we know the impact of COVID-19 has impacted that count, but approximately 120,000 students in our schools. We serve 21 public school districts, and you see the number of comprehensive high schools, middle schools, elementary schools, and we also have preschool classrooms that we operate in terms of GSRP and Head Start classrooms. We also provide support to charter schools in Macomb County as well as parochial schools. In Macomb County, we are very proud of our diversity. Many people don't realize that when you're talking about Macomb County schools in our county, we have over 100 different languages spoken in our county. And listed on the screen, you see some of the top languages that are spoken throughout our county. Our county, whether it's schools or other community outreach groups, we do an excellent job of supporting students and families in need. And just to give you an idea, we have approximately 1,100 students who identify as McKinney-Vento, which is homeless. And we know that number is probably higher because there can be a stigma associated with that identification. And we know that all students and families don't identify. But at the ISD, for example, we keep on hand a supply of school supplies, toiletries, backpacks, for students and family that we distribute on a regular basis, and schools can request that if their stock is low, but many of our schools have that stock, those kind of supplies within their schools. And if our families have a large emergency, such as a fire or a bigger need within their family, typically we send out an all-call and the Macomb community comes together to support families in need. On the next slide, you will see just the range when we're talking about social and economic status in terms of that free and reduced eligibility is what we use in a school setting. But if you look at our public school districts in Macomb County, you see that we have some of our school districts, such as Van Dyke, with as high as 94% of students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch, down to 22%. So that's the kind of spectrum that we have to work together to meet the needs of a variety of students and families. On the next slide, as an intermediate school district, we collaborate with all of our schools throughout the county, and we work very closely with our superintendents, our principals, our teachers, just all educators and community partners throughout the county. But as an ISD, we provide direct assistance in the area of curriculum, instruction, assessment, special education, business services, and technology. In fact, the Macomb Intermediate School District is the largest ISD in the state that provides direct support to special education students. We serve approximately 19,000 special education students, and some of those students have very severe needs. But again, we're so happy that we can meet the needs of those students and families. And it starts at a very early age that we have students come in for assessments when parents initially begin to have some concerns and questions. We also, as an ISD, monitor and react to legislation that affects public schools. And again, with the past year and a half, with so many executive orders and health orders, it has definitely been a challenge navigating and keeping up with all of the impact and all of the nuances around the legislation. We also provide support regarding school health and safety. If there's a crisis in the school setting, we have a crisis team at the ISD that's available to go out and support teams. Some of our schools have crisis teams within their schools, but some rely on the Macomb Intermediate School District to provide that support. And one of the exciting things we get to do is that we get to honor excellence every year. Last year, or during March, the spring of 2020, as we were in the midst of closing schools to in-person instruction, we did not have an opportunity to formally honor our outstanding teachers of the year. So it was heartfelt and even more impactful when we had the opportunity to recognize our teachers this year, and two of them are on the panel with us. And on the next slide, that may have been on the next slide, I just want to share with you just some of the ways we've collaborated during this pandemic. And I know Eric Edoff will speak more to this because our superintendents have from March of 2020, our superintendents especially have met minimally once a week, at least more frequently if required, just to stay on the same page as a county. And we pride ourselves in doing that in Macomb County as we navigate things together. And it's not just the school community. During that time, we've also had members of Macomb County, their health department, that have been right at the table with us during these weekly meetings as we've worked and navigated the challenges that have come our way. Some of the ways as an ISD we've supported local schools is that we wanted to try to relieve some of the burden around compliance. With the COVID-19 pandemic and school operating differently, there have certainly been a lot of compliance measures. And so we've developed some templates as an ISD to try to help schools navigate that so that they really could focus on students and teachers in the classroom. We also very early on purchased personal protection equipment and technology devices. Again, this was in partnership with Macomb County, but early on, as you know, as we were initially into the pandemic, our superintendents had the foresight to say, we need to start ordering this now. And so in partnership with Macomb County, we were able to do that. And we've had sufficient personal protection equipment in all of our schools throughout Macomb County. We also wanted to make sure we could still provide learning opportunities for students, whether they were in person or they were remote, and we wanted it to be engaging. And so again, partnered with Macomb County, and we were able to provide 10,000 STEM literacy kits for third graders throughout the county. And some of the students, you know, have begun using those, and we're already getting great feedback. And I know all of our third graders will get the opportunity to use those kits. At the onset of the pandemic, making sure all of our students were food secure, because as I shared with you, those free and reduced numbers, you can see the high percentage of students that rely on their meals, their lunch and breakfast during school. And so immediately we began to put plans in place to be able to make sure our students' basic needs around food were met. And just to share with you an example, and I haven't recently updated this, but just as an ISD, we distributed over 315,000 meals from just March of 2020, about the initial time of the closure, through October. And so that number has greatly increased, but that was a focus for not just the ISD, but also our local school districts. Several of them ran buses into the community so that students and families would not miss meals during this very challenging time. Now some of our focus has shifted to at the ISD, we posted several vaccination centers. And so we're supporting, you know, the school and the community in that area. So that's just a very broad view, but I know you will hear specifically about some of this from our panel members. So we are going to jump right in to the Q&A portion of the panel discussion. And the first question, I'd like each of our panel members just to share with you, as you think back over this school year, it's about a year and a half, how did COVID-19 impact you in your current role as an educator or as a parent? And we'll start definitely with the parent perspective.
Absolutely. So happy to be here, as Alicia said, from the parent perspective today. It was definitely quite a challenge trying to navigate both working from home, but also supporting my second grader and my sixth grader in remote learning. I would say that my son had a more difficult time as the second grader. Learning asynchronously was quite a challenge for him. And my daughter, the sixth grader, who's currently the sixth grader, did a great job handling virtual schooling. So I did have to support my son a lot more while also, trying to participate in my full-time job. But my daughter was able to handle it quite seamlessly. And I would say the biggest difference for us was the asynchronous versus the synchronous learning for our kids. So the more synchronous learning my kids had, the better they did. The asynchronous was a little bit more challenging. Now, with that being said, as we moved into this school year, now that we all knew what to do and the teachers were able to kind of pivot and do some different planning, this year has been even more successful as far as virtual learning and the pandemic and kind of pivoting between in-person to remote learning. So I can say we all were learning together, even as parents, when this all happened. But as time has progressed, I can say as a parent, I have felt better and better about my kids participating in their educational experiences moving forward.
And Bethany, what do you mean by synchronous and asynchronous?
So synchronous is more when the teacher is actually live or even on a video with the kids. So the kids can actually see the teacher's face or engage. The asynchronous is more when the teachers would just post assignments. So my kids would just have to navigate, reading directions, trying to complete assignments on their own without that teacher interaction or some of that live feedback. So both of my kids did a lot better when they had some kind of engagement and could see their teachers' faces or have some of that back and forth feedback with them.
Thank you. And Phoebe, how about you as a student?
I think my role as a student shifted with the pandemic because with online school, I really had to develop my time management skills, my reflection skills, and really my overall will to keep putting effort into my education because it was so monumentally different and more complex than it was before. So I think these skills and qualities were things that had been in the works for my entire high school career, but the pandemic and online school really forced me to put them to use in full force. And as far as the initial online experience, my teachers did spend that entire weekend right after the shutdown trying to figure out what school was going to look like and how they were going to continue giving us the education that we'd signed up for when we chose to go to the IAM. And so we started a full day of online class that Monday right after the pandemic. And so things were naturally a little bit awkward and there were things that we needed to work out at first because everybody was trying to figure out that role shift from a student to a student online. So for me, I feel like my role as a student has shifted and continued shifting since March 2020, all the way until a month ago when I finished school in April. I was constantly having to change and evolve in how I viewed my education and the methods I used to keep myself focused, even when we returned with an in-person hybrid model, which I believe that was in March. And so kind of generally, I think the pandemic increased the importance of the student role because the students had to continue showing up and giving everything we had to give towards our education. And so with kind of the move to online, the effort that we put into school was more in our control just because inherently, initially online, that couldn't really be monitored as closely as it was in person. So I think that in terms of academic honesty, or just really just paying attention during a Zoom, that was all kind of more in our control. And so that would mean that the student role kind of increased in importance with the shift to online, because we had to take some autonomy over our education and continue to prioritize it, even when it was more difficult to do that.
Wow, thank you, Phoebe. That was very powerful. Eric, how about as a superintendent?
So I think all of our roles changed probably more dramatically than we ever could have even expected them to. I don't think I can understate that enough about how different life became rather quickly. And I think having a lack of time to reflect is actually one of the problems with what's occurred over the past year and a few months, that without being able to reflect on what you're doing and reactions to things and how things are going, you kind of just keep steaming forward, and you don't have time to look back and see if anything was successful or not. And I feel like that period of time is very important, and we're starting to maybe capture some of that now. But as maybe you just saw, there's a new health order that just came out 30 minutes ago that will impact us, and we're just catching up to the one that became effective a week or so ago. So I think we are all experiencing this change fatigue as much as pandemic fatigue. I think it's more of a change fatigue, where everyone has capacity for change, everyone has capacity to accept change, but we've reached the limit of a lot of people's capacity to accept changes, because they're so rapid and we've become almost numb to them. And so I think from the spring of last year, where we had a lot of schools doing the same thing, we had sort of this spirit of we're all in it together, and we all have a very little political, I feel like, analysis of it or intervention. That really changed this fall. We started to see some differences in how schools approached learning, teaching and learning. People had different technological capabilities from district to district, from family to family, and you started to see politics intervene into the process, which was very unfortunate. So unfortunately, the fall was very tough for most schools. Although I think most of us are proud that the quality of teaching and learning improved this fall and winter compared to last spring, there was a lot more controversy about it. But again, I go back to, I believe it was just as much about change as it was about the actual situation with the virus and what was happening there. So all in all, I think a lot of us are very proud of the school year that we had. Certainly there are things that we will be able to again reflect on in the future that could have gone much better and we could have changed going backwards. But I think, we learned a lot, and we learned a lot about how meeting the needs of people and students meant something very different this year. And I think that it reached a whole new level of individualizing education and reaching out to families in ways that we never thought we would have to before. So I'm not sure that I am any good at predicting the future anymore, or even guessing what next week will look like, but hopefully we will have lessons learned that will create positive changes in education. And those will be long lasting and more permanent than changing things from week to week.
Thank you, Eric. And Bruce, how about from a principal's perspective?
The emotional level of that decisions impacted on people played a high degree. Like Eric said, I think in the spring we are inventing this together. I think we'd all agree that we went forward with plans that usually would have taken a year or more to flesh out, to do trial runs, to experiment with before we would finally decide. That process went away, and that happened in a weekend, I think, for all of us. And then the summertime was reflecting on what we had done and made plans for the fall without knowing what the fall would look like. If we go back to the fall, My school is situated in Utica Community School boundaries, and the idea was November 1st, Utica schools would be back. Maybe we would have a return to normalcy. What would that mean for parents who are looking for options for their children for learning, but making decisions with no certainty of what was going to happen in the future. And I think what I learned from that is we're not necessarily going to make hard and fast decisions for the fall until we are into July now, because things can change. But we certainly learned what our capabilities were, the balance of the emotions of parents and kids, staff members, all of that played a role. And as Eric mentioned, also then the insertion of philosophical and political opinions on that made it more difficult. I do think the one thing we found out is our people are more flexible and able to pivot quickly than we ever did before. I would say if we made an announcement to our community that we had changed such and such an event in 2 weeks from now, in the old days, that would have been very upsetting for people. Now, if we make an announcement in the morning that we're changing an event that evening, people are like, okay, I get it. We'll adjust our family schedule. So I think we've learned a lot about our ability to accept change. But that emotional level was, I found, to be the heaviest.
Yeah, and Bruce, I know as we get into further discussion, we definitely will talk about the social and emotional impact throughout this that we are all continuing to navigate. But I would like to hear from our teachers on this opening question. Dawn, you shared with me actually a presentation that you had given to your church and titled "Finding the Hidden Gems While Teaching During a Pandemic." And I know from a mindset perspective, you talked about a positive mind finds opportunity in everything, a negative mind finds fault in everything. So from a teacher's perspective, talk a little bit about your journey. And I know this mindset impacted how you navigated it.
Sure. Yeah, I right away realized that I needed to figure out what I can control and what I can't control in, this whole situation. I'm a type of person that likes control. I think a lot of teachers do. And so I had to step back and really look at what can I control in this situation. I can control myself, and I can look at my attitude, and I approached it with a positive attitude. And as I went through in the past year and a half, I've really been thinking, what can I take away from this, and what are some hidden gems in all of this, and focusing on that positive part. Of course, there were a lot of bumps and hiccups when we started back in March 13th. There was that, what are we going to do with technology? Some kids have it, some kids don't. Some kids have Wi-Fi, some kids don't. So all those uncertainties, as others have spoke about, was very unsettling. But as teachers, we pushed ahead and thought about what do we have? We have each other. Let's take this time, which I really found time to recharge and look at what I could control is investing in myself and some of the things that I could learn during this time. So there were free webinars that were people were putting out there. Our district pulled together a lot of resources for us to use to learn technology, because that was a huge thing. We had to pivot to put things on Schoology, which was an online platform for students to go in and get their assignments. Teachers didn't even know what that word was before, March 13th. So we had to put things on there and figure out how we were going to get this out to the community. My role is a interventionist and a coach. So I do literacy, but I jumped right in to figure out what can I do with technology? How can I help and support my teachers? They were looking to me as for guidance. And so I took that as an opportunity for myself to learn and to help those teachers that also wanted to figure out this together. And we're going to talk about social emotional, but I do think that was another piece that came to the forefront. It's something that a lot of people in our building in particular looked at, how can we meet the students' needs? Utica alone provided, I believe, 1.8 million meals so far. There is something on our Utica website as far as that. I mean, how awesome is that? Anybody in the community could come and can get meals. So, I could talk all day about this. I have a passion for education, but hopefully I answered that. I just had to look for the positive, and that's something that, I continue to do all the time.
And Gabrielle, speak a little bit about your journey. I know, especially as the student government advisor, you know, you work so closely with your students and wear so many hats with them. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Just a whole lot of changes, like everyone else had said. Our particular district had not even had internet in our schools the fall before the pandemic. And so then going to an all online platform a year later was incredibly different and difficult. In the spring, we really had problems with student access to device and internet. And so we weren't doing synchronous lessons. We were passing out paper packets because that's really all the students in our district had the ability to do. So then over the summer, getting devices for every single student, getting those passed out, teaching them and their parents how to use them, teaching the teachers how to use them. What is Google Classroom? How do you take something that had been paper and pencil and move it into an all online format? There are just so many things we had to look at about how we were teaching and make a lot of changes. It has been nice. Our district has been almost fully virtual the whole year. So that has been a great consistency for us. There was no back and forth between in school and out of school. So at least students were able to learn how to do lessons online synchronously and join our Zooms and our Google Classrooms and have stuck with that throughout the year. But there's still many challenges.
Thank you. So Bethany, as a parent, how did you motivate and encourage your children to stay focused while learning online and switching from remote to in-person?
I definitely had to really think about that from a parent perspective because again, keeping my second grader or my first grader at the time engaged was a little bit more challenging. But what I found worked the best for us was to try to keep as consistent of a routine as their school day would be at home was really what worked the best for us. So we actually created a daily schedule that we tried to duplicate what their school day looked like, and we would insert their learning into those pieces so that when they went back and forth from remote to home, they still had that same common structure and kind of that same flow of the day. To keep them motivated that the school day was in fact still that many hours and they couldn't just log on and get their work done quickly and go off and play. So I would say the biggest key for us was consistent routine, trying to keep things as similar to their school day as possible.
Thank you. And Phoebe, as a student, when you were virtual or remote, did you feel isolated and miss seeing your friends, or did you thrive in the remote or home learning environment?
I feel like for me, I was kind of in the middle. I personally feel like my mental health didn't suffer as much as it could have, as much as I know that of some of my peers did. I have a really solid group of friends, so I was constantly talking to people on FaceTime, or I have some friends in my neighborhood, so we would do walks on opposite sides of the street and yell across to each other. So I was still getting that socialization that I know a lot of people weren't. But I also did feel quite isolated, especially in the spring when we were still trying to figure out school. Not everybody had their cameras on, and it was just kind of, and even though we were on a Zoom for every class, it was just kind of teach and go. Like there wasn't nobody ever said anything funny in class and then somebody would laugh at it. You didn't get to talk to your friends in the hallways. So there were just those little things that you were missing out on. And that kind of restored itself in the fall because we were all required to have our cameras on. And so that aspect of things did get better. And class became less of just teaching and a little bit more of let's catch up with each other, see how we are, and things like that. But I did feel isolated, especially at the beginning, just because there were certain things that I was missing out on that I would have gotten had I been in person.
Yeah. And going back to our superintendent and principal, were teachers and students prepared to pivot from in-person to remote learning? Are there particular examples that come to mind when you did that initial pivot, or even as you think going forward? Eric or Bruce?
Sure, sure. I'll start. I think that this is another example of when you're having change that is magnitudinal like that. Some people, there's a curve of acceptance or whatever, where some people were quite ready to do it. Some people were very sort of excited about a new opportunity. Some people were terrified of it and extremely reluctant, and then a lot of people were somewhere in between. So I think you saw a willingness to move to remote instruction when necessary at the beginning of this, but a great variance in comfort level in doing so. So I'm sure that was reflected from students as well, that they saw that no matter where they went to school. And so I think that was, you had a different level, and parents certainly, we reflected with parents too about, well, one teacher is doing it this way, another teacher is doing it this way. And so we were always kind of catching up to create greater and greater consistency. And of course we got better with that. But I think initially it was really down to the fact of, like Bruce said, taking something that you would have taken a year to prepare for and doing it in 3 days. And so I think it was relatively successful for that period of time, but always you're going to have people at different ends of the curve on comfort and ability when making such a drastic change so quickly.
I'd say I'm very proud of my faculty in how we made the change so quickly. I would give anything to be proud of them for something else besides having to go through this past year. But they did. We were blessed that we had been embracing technology as an everyday tool in our school for a period of time. And so the learning curve for us, which was abrupt, wasn't as great as it might have been, as you were describing as in the Van Dyke School District. That would be a challenge that seems almost insurmountable. So we did asynchronous learning in the spring, and as people have mentioned, we reviewed and updated and shared resources with each other and added aspects. The one thing we knew the most was we had to have personal interaction. So we did begin school this fall with 5 days a week in-person learning with a virtual option, and that virtual option was live streamed. But with that brought the whole additional stress of teachers doing two things at once, which quickly became evident that was very wearing on our staff. But with not many alternatives, we kept doing that, and we have been able to stay in person all year, with the exception of a handful of times where we've had to quarantine a class or two. As has been mentioned by others, some students did well at it, and some students prefer it. They like to get up at the last minute and join class when they can. And then, of course, we know we have many students who just do not succeed in this element. They need to have live instruction.
Thank you. And Jennifer, we're getting to the point that we can take some questions, or I can keep going through questions, the committee's questions for the panel. Do we have any questions from the audience that we'd like to ask at this time?
Yes, one question did come in. Let's see here. What are the resources, tools, or updates that you will bring forward into the post-academic classroom? So if we want to talk about what we're going to use going forward, that's always interesting to know.
And that is in the chat, and I'm going to have our teachers take a stab at that one.
Yes.
I could speak for our district. I know going forward, we're going to continue with the technology usage that we've kind of brought in this past year. So our students will remain one-to-one. We'll continue to post on Google Classroom even when we're in person, so that you can see and parents can see assignments that are being given in class, also outside of the class for anyone who's absent. And I guess those are the big ones that come to mind for me. Definitely just more usage of technology. Our district hadn't been using as much and just weren't able to use as much before this, but we want to continue in that vein to help students.
Yep, Don, what are your thoughts on that?
I was going to say the exact same thing. Being the second largest district in Michigan, it was, 1-to-1 with our devices would have been nice way back. We heard communities around us had that, but just that cost. So with the monies from the pandemic, now every child in Utica K through 12 has a type of device, and haven't heard that they need to return that yet. So we'll continue to use those devices, and also some hotspots, Wi-Fi, things like that were provided, and hopefully those can continue with the CARES Act and money.
As a parent or a student, what additional support, if any, would you like to have had from school staff or teachers? And that one's out to Bethany and Phoebe during this time. And recommendations you may have going forward.
Yep, my recommendation as a parent would definitely be for any of the virtual or remote learning, kind of restating what I said in the very beginning, is that the teachers can engage with the students as much as possible on screen. So, less of the asynchronous or just the posting of things, and more of the teacher interaction, and trying to keep that schedule consistent for kids in that way. That made a huge difference from the spring to this school year for both of my kids. And now actually they both can navigate their days very well with the remote situation, because they do have that consistent, frequent interaction with their teachers throughout the day. So as a parent, that would be my biggest piece of advice. That was the thing that provided the most success for both of my kids.
And Phoebe, the same question from a student's perspective?
I think this is something that I've thought about a lot, and being a senior, this sort of online education has been the topic of many discussions with my peers. So I think that we've all collectively kind of come to the conclusion that our experience with the IAM, I have nothing but good things to say. We had live instruction since the spring, and that was really helpful, and just having the teachers checking in and it not just being posted online and having no live instruction. Having the live instruction was incredibly helpful, and it made the students want to keep showing up and putting effort in, because the teachers were showing up and putting effort in. And I will say that our school is fortunate enough to have all their students have a laptop. So that was something that we didn't have to worry about. That was a huge blessing that we were able to start right away. So I think that in general, I would agree with Bethany that the live instruction, synchronous learning is incredibly helpful when the classroom is kind of centered around that online model.
Thank you. And we know that we've seen lots of reports in the media, but certainly there's been some discussion about challenges in meeting the needs of special education students. How have you addressed students with special needs to ensure they're receiving proper education? Maybe from a superintendent or principal perspective, or one of our teachers.
I can go first. Our resource room teachers in our building did do private individual Zoom lessons with their students even back in the spring. And we discovered quickly that there's a high percentage of our special needs students that don't succeed, don't flourish to the level that they do when they're in the building. So that in-person learning, face-to-face, the in-person is superior to live in a Zoom. So it probably cemented what we already knew and gave hard data and observation to knowing that teachers need to be with kids.
Thanks, Bruce. And as we're getting close to our time for this portion of the discussion, I'm going to squeeze in a few more questions. Eric, when you talked about, everyone's talked about change, but when decisions are made about virtual and in-person, can you share with us, who do you confer with as a superintendent when you're making those kind of decisions?
So we discovered early on that the more cohesive we could be in a broader area, the better we were gonna, it's a better decision to be made. The more people that are looking at it and analyzing it, and also creates consistency as much as possible in a larger area. So when we make decisions, obviously they are framed by health orders, return to school documents from the state, but we work every week, sometimes every day for a few weeks with our local health department, met with them. The county, Macomb County, has been extremely helpful and receptive in trying to translate some of the noise from the state and from the federal government to make it operationalize it for us here in Macomb County. And they've been wonderful partners to work with. And just like Alicia mentioned, that, you know, as a superintendent's group, we still meet very frequently to kind of react and to be proactive as much as possible together. So, and then within our own districts, we obviously, I mean, this is not the right time to be making decisions by yourself, because not only do you not, quite frankly, we don't know the right answers because we don't have experience with making these types of decisions. So you're kind of putting heads together as much as possible and hoping that that collective thinking produces the best outcome from what you know now, but also not being so sure of yourself that you're not willing to have to change direction when you know something different, you know, and that could happen at any time. So as things change, you were right a month ago and now you're not right, and have to tell everyone that's the case. And so that's just kind of where we're at.
Yeah, thank you. So as we start to wrap up our the K-12 portion of this conversation, and certainly our audience members, please, if you have questions, we welcome them. Please put them in the chat. I asked our panel participants to think about one of two questions and kind of a final opportunity to reply. Did you discover any successful trends or strategies that you feel should be implemented moving forward? Some of you may have spoken to that, but this is also an opportunity for you to reflect and think back over this past year and a half. What achievements have you seen or experienced that you're most proud of? So either a point of pride or something that has been so successful that you absolutely think we should keep that going forward. And we'll start with our teachers on this one. Gabrielle, would you like to start us off with this one? Either a point of pride or a trend that's been so fantastic, we got to keep it moving.
So I suppose that my point of pride would be in the students who just really kept going despite all of the obstacles that they might be having at home, whether it's health related or internet related, just to see the kids who are consistently showing up and putting in so much effort in overcoming what is a really horrible situation. So I'm proud of them and the effort that some of my students are putting in and the relationships we were able to build, although we were online and just looking at each other through computer screens all year.
Thank you. Dawn?
Yes, I'd have to go along with the social emotional piece as well. When I meet about probably 9 to 10 groups a day of small students. So I'm fortunate to be able to work with, 4 to 6 students when either was in a Zoom call or face-to-face when we came back and working with them. And instead of just jumping right into reading and writing, we took some time every day to check in. I found some funny meme scales where the students would give me a number of how they were feeling for the day. And that gave me that opportunity. If a student wasn't feeling great, I'd say, would you like to talk about that? Another thing I did was a joke of the day, just to have us have some little humor every day. And for my first graders on up, we did joke of the day. And so if I forgot that, the kids will be like, where's the joke? Where's the joke of the day? Right. Again, with that routine, like Bethany spoke about. But those are a couple of things that I'd like to take with me as I move forward. It's academics, of course, are, at our forefront, but we also have to take that time to have that social emotional piece and look at our students and making sure that they're, where they're feeling and how they're doing for the day, because otherwise they're not gonna be able to learn if they're having something going on.
Bethany?
Yep. From a parent perspective, I can honestly say my biggest celebration is I feel confident that both of my kids learned and are on target and are where they're supposed to be, thanks to the effort of the district, the teachers. It was the whole, when we know better, we do better, kind of back to your reflection, Eric, that, as we're learning, we're trying to reflect, but do things better. And I truly feel like Utica, where my kids attend, they learned along the way and they made those pivots and those adjustments. And I was very nervous as an educator as well that my kids were not going to get what they need. But it's a huge celebration for me to say that everything Utica's done, I feel confident that my kids are exactly where they need to be.
And Bruce, point of pride or a super trend that we want to make sure we keep doing?
I have pride in my staff, and even though they were weary from providing two forms of learning at the same time, they were successfully able to meet their kids' social, academic, and then for us, importantly, spiritual needs. Some of the things, trends, not like a real big fancy thing, but little things that we would have never tried before, like Velcro circles for kids, for little kiddos lining up in the classroom. So now they're not pushing and picking at each other when they're in line because they're separated by 3 to 6 feet. There's a myriad of things that we would have never tried before that are little that we learned because of COVID.
Thank you. And Eric, as superintendent, point of pride, super trend.
I think point of pride definitely is the development of resilience amongst staff, students, and families. That I think that we were faced with a very difficult challenge. And I think despite the numerous bumps and the roller coaster ride that we've been on, that we have developed a lot of grit, a lot of resilience, and that will have a strong future positive impact on our kids going forward. Maybe it's not the way we wanted to get them there, but I think that is something that we should all be proud of no matter what situation that we're in, and that will, I believe, serve them well. I think a super trend is just that we discovered that in a very raw way that kids definitely learn differently no matter what situation that they're in. And we discovered a lot of different learning trends right in front of us that I think maybe when they're just coming to school every day in a classroom, they're not as obvious, and they became far more obvious in remote settings, classroom settings, hybrid settings. And we know now that most kids don't learn well in that virtual environment. Some kids learn better in that virtual environment. And it was a better year for some kids who were able to do that. Not common, but that's something you never would have discovered. So I think the way we connect with kids and paying attention to social emotional needs is going to be a long lasting change that I think also will be positive going forward.
And Phoebe, we began with you and you get to close this out. And as a senior, trends are a point of pride.
Oh, I guess I'm just really proud of the community that was displayed throughout this entire pandemic experience, not only from my school, but just even from observations that we've heard today. You just see that there's so much care and compassion and determination to give students a good education. And that is important to me as a student. And I know that means a lot to the students in our community. And I guess just something I kind of realized, and again, something I'm proud of, is that I know that we all kind of came to a realization that online school, and then for us, an eventual hybrid model would only work if we were working together to make it happen as students, teachers, staff, and parents. And so it really does take a village, and I'm just proud of the interdependency that kind of happened between the students, teachers, staff, and parents to make this work and to really just accept and adapt to this huge change that happened. So I'm just proud of the community.
Yeah, and you are so, just your words are just so profound, and it takes a village. It's very appropriate. I think we all, and Eric mentioned this, you could not have done this alone by no means. And we're proud that we have some points of pride and some celebrations to share. but we know, we know that there are challenges, still ahead of us. Eric mentioned there was another, health order or update, those will continue to come. And we don't know what the fall, as we prepare for the upcoming school year, we still aren't completely certain in terms of what that looks like, but we're hopeful that we definitely will have more opportunities for moving towards in-person instruction, while we still leverage the technology, the experiences that we have with technology. But the one thing I've heard from each of you that we know we will not lose sight of as educators is the social and emotional needs of our students, our parents, our families, our teachers, our staff, because this pandemic has impacted everyone differently. We know that we have students with us and returning with us next year who may have had loss, some have not. Some have had more levels of isolation than others. So there's some hard realities that have been escalated, in the setting of a pandemic, that we know that we will need to continue to work to address those challenges. But as Phoebe said, we're going to continue to do it as a village in Macomb County. And hopefully that's what you heard as you heard from our panel participants today. So any final questions, Jen? I know we're close to time, so.
No, that was perfect. So I want to thank you, Alicia, Eric, Bruce, Gabrielle, Dawn, Bethany, and Phoebe for your time and this great discussion. In my opinion, and I'm sure everyone on this call, you are all heroes. So thank you.
Thank you.
And now we want to turn our attention towards the impact COVID-19 has had on higher education and have a conversation with Dr. Jim Sawyer, again, president of Macomb Community College. During his tenure at Macomb, Jim has served as provost and senior vice president for the learning unit, the dean of engineering and advanced technology, and vice provost for career programs. Dr. Sawyer has been a principal investigator on 2 successful National Science Foundation grants and has led a cultural transformation from a focus on student access to student success. Patrick Rouse is the Director of Workforce and Continuing Education for Engineering and Advanced Technology at Macomb. His area is focused on helping individuals train, retrain, or upskill to connect with jobs that are in demand and in positioning local employers with the right talent to sustain and grow their businesses. Patrick, before you begin, just a reminder to everyone that if you have a question, please enter it in the chat box. And now, Patrick, you can take over.
Well, thanks, Jennifer, for that wonderful introduction for Dr. Sawyer and I. And it was very interesting to hear all the comments from the student perspective, as well as parents and administrators within Macomb County. So we appreciate that. Dr. Sawyer, well, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. I want to just jump right into some of the questions, if that'd be all right.
That's great, Patrick. Good to see you as well.
Well, thinking back over this academic year, how was higher education and then specifically Macomb Community College impacted by COVID?
Well, similar to what we heard from our K-12 colleagues, higher education was certainly impacted in a big way as well. Probably the most significant thing was the need to transition to a virtual learning and student service environment. And, to be honest, if you would have asked me if we could do that, I would have been doubtful pre-pandemic. The fact that we did that in about 11 days really was impressive to me. And it just shows the good work of our staff and the students' ability to adapt as well. And the fact, in our case, 75% on ground pre-pandemic. So we had a lot of transition to make. So we ended up transitioning about 1,700 courses in that neighborhood over that short period of time. And we were lucky. We've got a very robust, what we call Center for Teaching and Learning, that is staffed by instructional designers that help faculty with their coursework, as well as transitioning to an online environment. So those folks were literally working around the clock during that period of time, trying to help provide as much support as they could for students. The biggest operational impact we felt was our finances. In our case, pre-pandemic, we were approximately 40% of our revenue was tuition fees. And we took a tremendous enrollment hit for a couple terms. We were down significantly in the summer of 2020, and we're down, which is normally a small enrollment anyway. but in fall of 2020, we were down 16%, which had a big impact on us financially. And fortunately, we recovered a little bit in the winter. We were only down 7%. But that necessitates taking some actions from an expense perspective to reduce our expenses. But most troubling was we ended up laying off over 500 staff, and that's just very atypical for the college, right? We don't go through periods like that very often. So it was a culture shock as well as disappointing to disadvantage our colleagues like that. So we've got, over half of those folks have since been recalled during this period of time. But again, that's a significant impact on the college. The other thing was just how the operations had to change, the reliance on personal protection equipment. And if we think back to March of 2020, that was a big deal. Those things weren't available, and what was available needed to be given to health environments where it was an acute need. So just it's impacted us quite a bit. We developed what we called a playbook early on to guide us through this process to try to keep up with the rapidly changing guidelines and requirements. I couldn't agree more with Eric's comments regarding that. And as he said, we've got changes here occurring. Soon I was kind of doing double duty here. We're trying to watch or read about the governor's presentation at 11:30, and from what I understand, she's going to make an additional on Monday now. So it's just it's a constant challenge, and from a leadership perspective, we want to try to communicate as effective as we can. And there's a desire by our students and by our staff to know, what are we going to do, and to try to monitor those things as best we can and make decisions we can. And we've been very clear at Macomb since the very, our North Star in this has been the health and safety of our students, faculty, and staff. And every decision we've made has been guided by that North Star.
It's a couple of things that you pointed out there that stood out to me is what used to be normal, or what was kind of sudden early on, is now become normal, right? And so that transition is one of those things where in the past we were thinking about these, significant things that had to be done. And even we heard that from Eric and some of the parents as well, of what needs to be transitioned to. Even prior to COVID, those might have been huge asks. And now it's like, okay, well, it's just normal. We've got the governor going to say something today and maybe something on Monday, and we'll have to make some adjustments. And that's just comes to our normal. I think we're all probably looking forward to the day where COVID isn't part of the discussion and change of today for tomorrow isn't part of that discussion.
No, I agree, Patrick. And I think, the takeaway of that, or the silver lining in that, is people have pushed and stretched and have surprised themselves in many cases, I'm sure, with what they've been able to do. And that's one of the characteristics we want to make sure we take away, the ability to do that.
Well, then could we expound a little bit more on the transition to online from Macomb Community College? How did the college handle that transition early on, and then kind of how did it roll out to today?
Well, as I said, we had about 75% of our classes were on ground during that period of time, or pre-pandemic, but many of those already had what we call a Canvas course shell, which is they already have a presence in our learning management system with syllabi and handouts and things like that. So they had a minor online presence, if you will. So the heavy lift was those classes didn't even have that. And again, that's a positive for us now that all of our classes have that Canvas shell online, which students certainly like the ability to monitor what they're doing. Things you don't think about or we hadn't thought about at the time, tremendous demands on our IT folks in terms of getting equipment, not only for our students, but also for our staff. And, trying to make sure we had that available as quickly as we can at a time where there was very high demand across the country. Some of our licenses had to be expanded. We didn't have, large enough capacity on things. So, all those things went much better than I could have anticipated. Not without a lot of very diligent effort by a lot of people. One of the things that we recognized early on was, some students simply couldn't make that transition to an online environment. And so we opened up the opportunity for students to drop with 100% refund. We don't normally do that far into the term, but again, the second guiding principle behind the health and safety aspect, to have a student-centered approach. and try to make sure the efforts we were taking were going to be in the student's best interest. And certainly, in some cases, forcing students into an online environment where they weren't prepared for that, up for that, and just couldn't be successful. We didn't want to force them down that funnel if it just didn't work for them. So, and again, I mentioned earlier, we had we were fortunate to have a very skilled Center for Teaching and Learning staff that was positioned to provide that help for faculty. And I can't tell you how many faculty I heard sharing how much they appreciated that support to help make that transition.
That sounds like it's an excellent group, that's for sure. You spoke a little bit about some of the struggles for the transitioning students early on. So what is your thoughts on the current and future high school students transitioning into college now that all these things are kind of unraveling and some things have become normal and, that type of thing?
Well, I'm very optimistic about that. I mean, the conversation about college preparedness has been ongoing for a long period of time. And, that in the past, that decision has been made based on standardized tests such as the ACT or SAT. And, when this occurred suddenly in the spring of 2020, many colleges had to forego those tests because they simply couldn't take the test. They couldn't use the test. So they adopted other ways for students. And, at Macomb Community College, we're an open access institution, so we don't require those tests. But we did have what we call placement tests, where we had students take tests to try to place them, particularly for math and English. And we couldn't do those as well. And that was kind of serendipitous, frankly, Patrick, because there's been a great body of research in the last several years that has really pointed out that high school grade point average is a much better predictor of success in college than those standardized tests. And when you think about it, that kind of makes sense, right? The high school experience, the GPA, is a measure of a number of different things, in terms of persistence and grit and the effort students put forth, as opposed to just how they perform in a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 hour test on any given day. So, we've made that transition and hope to continue that as we go forward and just see that as a better way to integrate students into our courses. I'm also very optimistic. I think, our K-12 colleagues are dedicated to trying to address whatever learning shortfalls have occurred. And we heard that from our speakers earlier. And I'm very heartened by their efforts. I have no doubt they're going to be innovative and creative and find ways to make up for those gaps in time. And kids are resilient too. I think, they'll bounce back quickly, some more than others. If there's one concern, it's probably from the students from the families from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. We talked earlier about some of the challenges they've had in the transition to online and being able to keep up. So, I do have, if I had a concern, it's in that area. But again, I have great confidence in our K-12 teachers and staffs, and I think they'll rise to the occasion and get students ready.
I appreciate that view. And, I just want to echo what Jennifer just typed in the chat. If you do have any questions, please put them in the chat. We'll get to them here in a moment. Thinking back over this year, you spoke a little bit about the resiliency. I think we heard that echoed throughout the early part of this panel discussion with the parents and staff and student. But what other achievements have you seen or experienced in relation to education as we go over this past year?
Well, in our case, I mean, I agree with the resilience and perseverance comments first and foremost. I don't really think that can be overemphasized enough, because I think we were all surprised with how well people adapted to this, and really their flexibility too. It's really taking a lot of folks out of their comfort zones because they had to. Whereas to your comments earlier, Patrick, when you don't have to, well, it might be a little tougher to come along sometimes. So this was really positive. What I've tried to help remind our folks is we've had over 16,000 students who continue to make educational progress through this very disruptive time. And, that's critical. They're trying to, pursue their educational goals to move on in life and pursue new careers or change careers. So the fact that we were able to provide them an opportunity to do that through all this, I think is very, very important, and something that we need to make sure we don't lose sight of. I think we've learned that, and I'll speak personally, I was never a big fan of remote work in the past. I've certainly learned that can be an effective way, particularly for certain jobs. I don't know that it works for every job well, although I will say that I've been tremendously impressed with how our staff have adopted to that remote work environment. While we're effective in that, some jobs, particularly at a community college, you just have to be there, right? Some students need to come on ground and talk to people face to face and be serviced that way. But certainly there are some jobs that will be able to do remote on occasion. And then, from a business operations perspective, the technology that we've adapted is going to provide us some long-term operational efficiencies. We're a large college with multiple locations, and people would have to travel to meetings from time to time. And I think we've seen, we've implemented Teams at the college, and Patrick, you and I have joked about that. I mean, it would have taken us years to do that under normal circumstances, but we became pretty adept at it in a very short period of time. And I see us continuing to do that for many of our meetings, just because it saves people drive time. And again, it's just much more operationally efficient.
Yeah, it was interesting. You just echoed the resilience piece. As you said that, I thought about last year when, it kind of just all paused for those 2 to 3 weeks when all this started to roll out back in March. And no one really knew what was going to transpire after that. And it just seems like everybody, rolled up their sleeves and said, well, this is what we're going to do to get through this. And as a community, we all did that in all various parts, and some struggled in certain areas, and people picked them up, and some others had challenges in other areas, and we picked them up and we got through, whether it be in our business communities, whether it be in our education communities. It just shows how resilient we really are as a community and how we're able to move forward. So I appreciate that thought.
I agree wholeheartedly with that, Patrick. I mean, it really, there was this spirit of getting things done, if you will, and people were much more willing to step in and help out and provide some slack, if you will, if things weren't going well, recognizing the challenges people face. And again, I hope that's a takeaway going forward.
And the last question for you, Dr. Sawyer, before we head on to some of the questions from the group, how has the higher education landscape changed, and what are your overall predictions going forward?
Well, I talked about the fact that we had, decline enrollment last year. And that, by the way, that wasn't unique to us. That was across the country. And we were maybe down a little more than around the country, but the rate was over 10% countrywide as far as declines. And a specific concern I have with that is a big area we lost students were the students who were high school graduates that year. So the graduates of 2020. And, I think many of those students just decided to take the year off rather than jump into all the disruption and trying to continue. Their last 3 months of high school didn't go well. Things were changing constantly, and why start college in that sort of chaos, if you will. But I worry we may have lost some of those students. Students who don't make that transition right away, all of a sudden life gets in the way, or they may have made other decisions now. So they may forego education for the time being. So that's a concern. And I think we want to try to get many of those students as we can into either post-secondary or other types of job preparation type programs, just so they're better prepared for the future. We know the higher levels of education are critical for the better paying jobs of the future. So, ways to do that, I think is really important. I think there's going to be a permanent transition to a permanent increase in online education. I still don't see that being predominant for us at Macomb Community College, but I mentioned the 25 or 35 or 30% figure that we were, online previously. I think we'll see a permanent growth there as well, which just as students that were forced to go down that path now find out, hey, it's not bad. Maybe I can, this works for me. And from a scheduling perspective, and our students balance complicated lives between jobs and families and other commitments, that may work for them. I think we've pushed the envelope on technology for some people too, where they've had to improve their skills. And I think those are lifelong skills, right? Those are good life skills going forward, which I think is positive. And as we think about the future, I think we just need to recognize the importance of partnerships. And we've had good partnerships with our K-12 and our university colleagues for a while, but I think we've seen opportunities for that to improve, and that really becomes critical now as we look at the education community from a broader perspective. We need to make sure we're doing everything we can to try to help students make that educational progress.
Yeah, those are vital points, Dr. Sawyer. You mentioned a couple of things that just stood out to me right off the bat. I think about that digital media literacy. We all talked about it before COVID. It was important, but then all of a sudden COVID hit, and now it's vital. It's not a soft skill, it's a critical competency, something we have to do moving forward. We have to have that as part of our curriculum. Jennifer, do we have any other further questions from the group?
Unfortunately, we are just about out of time.
Oh, okay.
In our 90-minute webinar series. So I want to thank Dr. Sawyer and Patrick, both of you, for this great conversation. It's been a wonderful learning a little more behind the scenes of Macomb Community College and what higher ed has gone through in compared to K through 12. So thank you, Jim, and thank you, Patrick.
You're welcome, Jennifer.
Karen, I'm going to pass it over to you to wrap up the day.
Okay, well, what a informative session. And I want to thank you, Jennifer, and Dr. Fly, and Eric, and Bruce, and Gabrielle, and Dawn, and Phoebe, and Bethany, and Patrick, and Dr. Sawyer, not only for sharing such wonderful information, but just for your, tenacity and patience and ability to change, and all you've done over the past 14 months. And and before that, and what you'll be doing going into the future. I know it's going to be a lot of changes. So I hope that you all get a chance to reflect on all the positives, because it does look like there were so many positive things that came out of all the challenges that you had to face. So thank you for sharing. It really means a lot. I want to just let you know too that our Junior Leadership Macomb program, we are going to be holding that this year. It'll start in July, and it's for students that will be high school juniors as of September. Our application deadline is May 25th, and we have a couple of spots open. So if you need more information, please check out our website or contact us. It's a great program for high school juniors that teaches them about the county and introduces them to local leaders and helps them with job shadowing and teaches them the importance of community service and just a lot of other skills, financial literacy and things like that. So we're very excited that we'll be able to do that program this year, because we were not able to offer it last year. And then our next virtual session, our last one of this series, will be on June 3rd. And we're going to be focusing on diversity. And we're going to be hearing from Stephen Welch. He is the Chief Diversity Officer for Saks off Fifth Avenue, an excellent presenter. And he's going to be one of our presenters. And then we've got some personal stories that are going to be shared from people that have faced some challenges in their lives as a result of people maybe not being as open or accepting of them. So we're going to have Kayla Blackburn speaking, and she's a law student, and she's had her own challenges in her life, and we're hoping to have another lady that is a professor at a college in California, and she shares her story about immigration and coming here to the United States as an Indian woman and what she went through. So it'll be a lot of personal stories, and hopefully we'll leave and end the series on an upbeat note. And so I hope you can tune in for that one. Thank you again, everybody, for being here. I appreciate it. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you.